Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours. I'm delighted to spend time with Denise Ilitch in Day in a Canoe podcast today. Welcome, Denise. It's been great to meet you. And we serendipitously met through a mutual connection. Yes. And I'm excited to have a conversation with you. You've been so involved in the Detroit community, certainly coming from your parents' impact with Little Caesars, the Detroit Red Wings, Detroit Tigers, Fox Theater, so many business initiatives. Curious what it was like growing up in the Ilitch household.
It was really a lot of fun. I'm the oldest of 7. So over, a 12-year period, my mother had 7 children. It was, my dad was a lot of fun growing up. He used to play a lot of different games, really enjoyed children. But they were building their business at the time, so there was always a lot of excitement in the house. And of course, everybody played sports, mostly my brothers, but my sister as well. So our life really revolved around their growing business, us growing up, kind of a new family, and sports.
Now, the Little Caesars name has expanded worldwide. Isn't there an interesting story how the name actually evolved? Like, how did that appear?
Yes, it's funny. My mom tells it the best, but I'll try. If you know my dad, he always loves everything first class, even when he was starting. And so they were talking about a name, and they had come up with Pizza Treat. And then Mom said, you remind me of a Caesar, like a king. She said, but you haven't accomplished anything. So I think you're more like a Little Caesar. And it stuck. And so they ended up naming the first restaurant Little Caesar's Pizza Treat. The Pizza Treat, I think it dropped over time. Now it's Little Caesar's.
Well, thanks to Mom.
Right?
She always had good perspective, it sounds like.
Right.
Now, as you grew up within business, the influence of your parents, what was it like from your perspective as you just evolved through your life, your career? What are some of the highlights that stand out to you as you look back?
Well, I think it was, I'm a daddy's girl. I absolutely adored my father. And I figured out early that if I wanted to spend time with my dad, I had to go to work with him. And so that's what I did. And he was so inclusive, would take me in the car like 11 at night, looking at real estate sites, visiting stores. I learned a lot about how to choose a good site, just watching my dad evaluate an area. And he drove a lot. That was a highlight that I remember. And of course, as we built the company, we worked together, and he and I really hit it off because he's a marketing genius and was very creative and valued creativity, very much an entrepreneur. So I learned a lot from him, and we just had a great partnership working together. He had great wisdom, and he loved my ideas about things. We're both really creative. So it was a lot of fun building the business together. We decided to develop down the I-75 corridor as far as how to take franchises. I think it was like 1962 when my dad and Mom decided to franchise their first store. And so now we have 5,000 stores, 2/3 franchise, 1/3 company owned.
That's an amazing evolution because you don't usually hear of someone who's focused on creativity going into true distribution enterprise.
Right.
Was it the franchising model that really brought that vision to
I think
reality?
so. My dad has a great story. He was on an airplane young. He did not graduate from college. Neither of my parents did. And I was the first to graduate in our family. He was on the plane, and he was seated, as he tells it, next to an oil man. And the oil man started talking to him about royalties with oil. and how profitable it was. And it really stuck with him. And that's what really spurred him to think about franchising. The stores became so successful, the early stores, my dad was told that pizza was a fad, and he ignored that and ended up, I think it was $25,000. It was the first store cost, or put down $25,000. And it wasn't a fad, but as the stores did well and became more successful, more people would come to him and say, look, I want a store. And so he decided to franchise, and it has been a big part of the development. You don't have to require as much financing, so to speak, because it's really those local franchisees that end up kind of financing your growth through them building their own stores. And some are one store owners and some are multiple store owners.
How did you, what were your stepping stones as you grew up into the business or into different interests that you were finding that you were drawn to?
I think that getting my law degree was really pivotal. It taught me so many things besides the law. It teaches you about speaking up, not being intimidated when challenged, how to articulate an argument, how to evaluate an issue. There's so many skills, and I think that was probably one of the most key things that I had done that had really helped me with my career. Back in the day, before laptops were really popular, I was asked to take notes in meetings. I'd sit with my dad and everybody, and I was always the one asked, which annoyed me to no end. And many times it would be my dad that would ask me. And once I graduated from law school, I was never asked again to take notes, which I thought was so interesting. And I was really happy about that. But I just started in the legal department and then fell in love with marketing, which was next to legal. And told my dad, I want to do marketing. And maybe subliminally, that was also about working closer with him because he was so involved in the advertising, marketing, sales. He always would say, look, there's a lot of people that can count the money. There's not a lot of people that can bring it in. So we should focus on sales and getting the dollars in the door. And then, of course, my mother was brilliant in finance, and she was the one that really watched the money.
What did you see in the dynamic between your father and mother around just how they operated, or did they have their own lanes of focus?
Yes.
And what was your observation?
I mean, it was
from your
really
vantage
interesting. They had their own lanes, but of course those lanes crossed quite a bit. And Dad was always the big idea person, and Mom was always the control person. And so there was always kind of a natural tension between those two, but they seemed to figure it out and build an amazing company. I remember an example is I went to them and I said, you two confused me. I don't know whether to go get a mortgage and buy a house or pay cash for the house, because Dad was always about, my mom was always about paying things off, cash, and be done. My dad was always about using other people's money with which to grow, and so he was much more into finance. And they had different risk tolerances, is what I observed over time, is that my father's risk tolerance, I don't know if he even had any kind of tolerance with respect to risk. It was so far to the right. And you saw that a lot when he'd want to sign contracts for the Tigers. And my mom's risk tolerance was I think healthy and average, but always looked much more controlled compared to my dad because his was so great, the risks that he would take. So I learned about a calculated risk, kind of middle of the road, by observing, their styles and their philosophies.
Opposites attract.
Yes,
we know that's usually
that's true.
A story that's in play. But the aspect of different styles of risk, I think, is just such a common life experience that we all deal with.
That's right.
Whether it's relationally, whether it's just thinking about an investment portfolio, whether it's thinking about where to spend your time and energy and the next vacation trip, things like that.
That's right.
What is it that how did you get more involved into the business? How did places or the teams, the Tiger teams, the Red Wings teams, how did those stories come into play?
Well, as we grew, then we just got more involved. And I got more involved. I joined Little Caesars when we had 50 stores. I left Little Caesars, I think we had 3,500 stores. And so it was really fun to be able to see, the company grow like that. So, yeah.
No, that's significant. One of the things that we talk about is when the topic of money comes up.
Yes.
Sometimes it creates tension, sometimes it creates questions. How was the money topic within your family? Was it just let dad do it, or was it participatory? What was your experience?
It was really quiet. I think that my dad did not really talk about money a whole lot. My mom would talk about it because she was the controller, basically, or the CFO, basically. But they never really, it was always in a business sense. I never felt from day one, and since I was the oldest, I probably was raised different, definitely differently than, let's say, number 7, because our business was so different, right? But I always felt that I had had enough, and I never felt any difference really between the first store and the 3,000th store. I think people treated us differently by that. But I watched my dad just be the same person, my mom be the same person, really. Maybe at Christmas I'd see a little better gift that my mom and dad would give each other during that time. But it was interesting. It wasn't top of mind spoken about.
Sounds like they were great models with their consistency, just
Yes.
of how they lived, and
Right.
they were authentic, it sounds like, and your mom is still living.
Yes,
and
yes, very much so. They had an enormous amount of humility and taught that to us, that was really key. You were told constantly not to brag, kind of ad nauseum. I'd be, okay, Dad, we got it, But I often tell young parents when they ask advice, I always say, you can talk till you're blue in the face. It's all about what you do and what your actions are. And my parents were really true to themselves, to your point. They remained humble. And so they showed us that was something that they valued. Like, as an example, my mom would say, always buy a house under your means. I'm like, why? And she's like, well, if anything goes wrong or if there's ever a crisis, you'll be able to handle that. So it wasn't
sounds like a great financial planner. Please
right?
Let her know that if she's ever interested in
Right.
coming on the team, doors open.
Right.
Now, all of those life stories and experiences kind of build up to the present moment. What is it that's important to you, and where are you spending your time? What are some of the things that are on your dashboard of priorities?
Right. Well, at this stage in my life, I'm very much into helping others and philanthropy, being able to make a difference, to make our life better. I often say, I tell a story on my podcast to introduce it, and it's really, when I was growing up, we would sit around the kitchen table. My dad would want to know how school was and everything, and one day he looked at me and he said, "What did you contribute to the world today?" And I looked at him and I'm like, "Dad, nothing. I'm only 10. But what was so interesting about that is that it really planted a seed in me, not only that I was worthy to contribute, but that it was very important to contribute. And so I'd like to just leave the planet a little bit better than I found it. So I've been working on different boards, the Skillman board, which helps Detroit children at risk, and of course I'm a regent at the University of Michigan, and I just love that. I think that Michigan can change the trajectory of a student's life. We train leaders, and I think that's really important work.
And what led you into that space, and what's your passion and focus with the Regents group?
I think it was kind of an accident, because I had been asked to run for different offices. President Obama had asked me to run for governor, and I'd been asked to run as an AG or a Secretary of State. And I didn't really have a passion for that. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you what you should run for. You should run for University of Michigan Regent." Of course, I went to the University of Michigan, but all I cared about was school and social, right? I didn't even know that the Regents were there when I was there. I'm like, a Regent? What do they do? And the more I looked into it, the more I was really intrigued by it because, as many know, your colleges, you always have a soft spot for your university. And I certainly do. I joke that I can't leave yet. I'm still there.
Well, it's a great group to hang out with.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. It's a fun group.
You mentioned your podcast. What is your podcast about, and who do you have conversations with?
Well, I talk to a lot of different community leaders. It's very Detroit-centric. I had just observed, particularly post-pandemic, that people were really having a hard time mentally, that people were really struggling with adversity and issues. And so I thought it would be great to talk to people, leaders, and share with listeners about how to deal with adversity. How did you deal with adversity? What's the worst thing that happened to you, and how did you cope with it? I think confidence is very important. That was a value that my father taught us, and he was like the king of being the most confident person. And so I talk to people about that because no one escapes adversity. And many times your confidence is impacted when you do face adversity. So how do you keep your confidence strong? How do you protect it if somebody starts to give you a hard time or mistreat you in some way? So the stories have been really interesting, and I've spoken to a lot of great leaders. My most recent was Jeff Daniels, and he was just terrific. President Ono at the University of Michigan, Karen Drew on WDIV, just really lovely people. And everyone has a different kind of take a little bit, which is interesting. It's not like cookie cutter. Everyone has a slightly different way they deal with those issues. And so I'm hoping and praying that it inspires people and helps them a little bit, makes their day a little bit easier.
To reflect back your questions maybe to some of your guests, I would ask you, is there any instances of life adversities where you've had some ahas or some learnings that you can say this was the takeaway? And it's not always easy for sure, but
right. No, I think that I've had a lot of adversity, and I think what I do is I stay very calm. I notice that the more serious the situation, the calmer I am. I don't know why that is. And so that helps me think really clearly. I don't make decisions when feeling really emotional. I often say to people, I think you should invoke the 24-hour rule or maybe even the 48-hour rule and not, make quick decisions when you're upset or something terrible has happened. I look for a lot of support. I kind of call in my support system, whether that's people or things that I do that, make me feel stronger. And I often try to look for a resolve. Like I just have this resolve that I tap into when things get very tough. And I know that this too shall pass.
Do you think that that recipe that you described is available for everyone, or is it more circumstantial depending on your life story or where you came from?
I think everyone has different coping mechanisms based on how they've been raised and what's happened to them and how they view life and what their style is. Everyone's a little bit different as to what helps them and what motivates them. It's not a cookie cutter, but one thing I do want to share is that it's really important people ask for help. I've noticed that some people feel that asking for help is a weakness, and it's not. It's a strength. And so I would really encourage people to not hesitate, that if you're struggling with something, reach out, talk to somebody you trust. Don't hold it all in. Tap into all the resources that you have available to you, because really asking for help is a strength.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our conversation, one of the things that All Day in a Canoe guests get to share is a lesson learned in the perspective of, if you were to give a 20-year-old Denise advice, what would it be?
I think it would be, and I don't like this answer, but I think it would be not to work so much, if I was really being honest with myself. I do love doing a lot of different things during the day, and working. I was raised that way. My parents were, children of the Depression. They were worker bees. But if I had to look back, I would say just keep it in perspective, and work isn't everything, that you really have to be well balanced in all that you do. So that would be it, because now what I'm doing is I've flipped the other side, and all I want to do is have fun now and enjoy life. So I'm hoping I'm balancing it out, even though I didn't do it day to day. I'm doing it now decade to decade.
Fair enough. I think your priorities are clear, and that's the most important thing.
Right.
I want to thank you for your time and sharing with listeners your story. I would want to wish you all the best in the days ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.